Without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Phil Sutcliffe, who's going to tell us about AI reimagining marketing research.
Morning, everyone, and pleasure to be here today and to meet with you all. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, I'm a long-time market researcher. I spent, more than 25 years at Kantar. In my last role there, I was the board director responsible for offer and innovation in offer and methods in the insights team in the commercial research. And then a few years ago, I took an investment in what at the time was a startup, Nexxt Intelligence. And what we do through our inca suite of capabilities is really our purpose is about using AI to put the human at the center. So essentially, we're trying to create better, more human experiences for participants and researchers as they're designing research, and to provide deeper human insights at scale for researchers and their stakeholders from the outcomes of the research. So my focus from this session is using chatbot-led conversational AI and how we can do that to get deeper insights at scale from research participants. So I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like, how this works, from a study that was done by one of our agency partners, MMR. So we start with the first question that was set by the researcher. If you had to pick one brand that really stands out to you as one that speaks to you and delivers a kind of value that matters to you, what brand and product type would that be? And then the participant answers.
So that's easy, hands down, has to be Colgate. It makes my smile so radiant, so white, and it just makes me feel good. And I also know that it's good for the brand.
So next what happens is we've trained the AI to ask a good follow-up probing question, similar to the way in which a human moderator might do in a depth discussion. So this is the probe that the AI generated. You can see it starts off showing a bit of empathy, a radiant smile sounds wonderful, and then probes for more detail on what the participant just told us. Can you tell me more about how it is good for the planet?
So, see this tube here? So first off, I know that it's really easy to use, and it's fully recyclable. Colgate was one of the first brands to make this change. And they also openly shared their design information just so other brands can follow suit. So I think that's really amazing.
And then the AI probes again. That's certainly an unprecedented move. What does that tell you about this brand?
What it says to me is that they care about the products that they make and how they make it. Not only is it confidence boosting for me and makes me feel good, but I also feel even better knowing that it's good for the environment too. So I know that they're not making any more unnecessary plastic waste.
So hopefully you can see a couple of things from that. Firstly, you can actually see the engagement of the participant, how by asking good, relevant follow-up probing questions, they stay engaged with the topic. Secondly, how much more depth of understanding we get when we go through the probes and we get just from the first answer alone. And that, of course, is just one participant. And the real advantage of this type of approach is you can do this with tens or hundreds or even thousands of people in a very short space of time. Now, this type of approach, what we call conversational AI for research, is often called qual at scale. It's not particularly a term I like, as I'll explain in a moment. But just before I go on, I'm interested actually to know how many of you may have used something like this in a social research setting. Can we have a show of hands if anyone's done this? A smattering of people. OK, so hopefully this is fairly new to most of you, and you'll learn some interesting things today. Now, the reason I don't really like the term qual at scale is, for me, it betrays a little bit of a lack of knowledge of what qual is, and it's a bit of an oversimplification. I'm actually a quanti by background, but I've done enough qual to know that qual is a spectrum. Conversational AI can be used as an alternative, or indeed, in some use cases, a replacement for what we might call lighter qual. So types of qualitative research that are fundamentally about asking questions, hearing the participant's answer, probing, asking another question. It can also maybe be used, and this is a quote from one of our clients, as a way in or paving the way for deeper qual. And I actually feel moderators shouldn't particularly feel threatened by this type of approach, because if you can strip out a lot of the question and answer stuff, the moderator can really focus on what they do best. So the nonverbal communication, or understanding the interpersonal relationships, or deeper, more multi-stage work, or observational or ethnographic research. Now, one thing that's really important to note with conversational AI is, just like there are good qualitative moderators and less good qualitative moderators, there's really good conversational AI and less good conversational AI. And in a way that's somewhat similar, maybe, to with human moderators, is a big part of the difference comes down to the training and therefore the expertise. Now, we all know there are certain best practice principles for asking good questions and asking good probing questions in a discussion. And a good moderator will instinctively weave those into their conversations, their interviews with participants. But within AI, we need to train it to do that. So we actually learn from the best human moderators. So good conversational AI will make sure that it's been trained to follow those best practice principles. For example, not asking leading questions, or not asking two questions in one, making sure that we don't probe on answers that are off topic, making sure that we don't probe on any answers that are inappropriate or even toxic, and that we try and probe with empathy. Now, of course, AI itself isn't empathetic, but we can train AI to show empathetic characteristics. So here's a couple of examples, again, from one of our partners, MMR, who've done a lot of research on research into different AI chatbots. So firstly, I'm going to show you an example of where it doesn't work so well, and then I'll show you an example of where it works well when the AI has been trained more effectively. So in the top left, yes, is your left, you can see the first question that was posed by the participant. In the top right, sorry, the first question posed by the researcher. In the top right is the participant answer. Then the probe in the middle on the left, actually, it doesn't build on the participant answer at all. Effectively, it's a whole new question. It's not really a probe. In turn, we get a response in the middle on the right with not much depth. And then the probe after that, this time it's actually complicated. It covers too many areas, and the response we get from the participant in the bottom right is starting to feel a little bit repetitive, and the participant's probably getting a bit frustrated by this time. On the other hand, if we train the AI more effectively, the chatbot can get to much deeper insight. So we start off with the same first question, same first participant answer. But this time, the response, first of all, it shows some empathy. That sounds delicious. It then does build on the participant response. What specifically about this chicken makes it the best for you? And then you can see what that unlocks in terms of more verbatim and richer insight from the participant in the middle on the right. And then the second probe, again, it shows some empathy. That sounds like a lovely memory. It builds on the person's response. You mentioned enjoying it with friends at home, whilst keeping to the focus of the question, what does that tell you about this brand? And again, that unlocks more nuance and more understanding from the participant. Now, whilst lighter qual can be replaced with conversational AI, or conversational AI can be used as an alternative, where conversational AI is also very effective is in bridging the historical divide between qual and quant. We know that qual and quant have traditionally been separate disciplines with their own techniques and methods. But with conversational AI, we can start to scale or quantify what otherwise would have been qualitative approaches. So this is an example of an output of where we did that. So what we were actually doing here was we wanted to actually understand the category was water filtration devices, so things like Brita filters. We wanted to understand the emotional benefits that people were seeking within that category, the functional benefits that would relate to that, and how sensory and product cues would ladder up to that. Now, if we were doing that in a qualitative sense, we might use something like metaphor elicitation followed by laddering. We actually did the same here, but the chatbot was doing that. So we started off by showing some visual metaphors, some images, asked people to choose which represented their ideal in terms of how they would want to feel from well-filtered water. And we then asked why they picked that image, and the AI probed for more depth on that. We then asked them what would be ideal in terms of what they were looking for in terms of the functional benefits from a water filtration, their ideal water filtration device. And again, the AI probed for more detail on what they'd just told us, before then asking about what are the product cues that relate to those ideal functional benefits, and probing once again. We then used AI to actually theme and code all of the verbatim we got, because we did this with hundreds of people. And therefore, an output is similar to Qual in being able to tell us the key themes and how they ladder, how they relate to each other, but we can actually quantify it. So we have the size of each of those themes, and we can also do statistical analysis to look at the relationships. So through the laddering, we can actually see the key relationships between the sensory cues, the functional benefits that are sought, and the emotional benefits that are sought. Now, whilst conversational AI can be used to help scale certain qualitative approaches, I actually believe, and this is another reason why I don't like the term qual at scale, its real transformational opportunity for us as researchers is to replace pretty much all quant surveys and to do them a lot better. And I'm going to focus in the rest of this session on why I think that is and show you some examples of how you can do that. But first of all, let's think about why surveys need to change. Well, in my view at least, the online survey experience, most of the surveys I see, they don't give a great experience to participants. In fact, most online surveys I see, they don't look very different to how they did 20 years ago. And they weren't a great experience then. And it just seems a bit crazy to me. What other form of online communication hasn't really moved forward in 20 years or more? And this is particularly important when we put it in the context of the crisis we're seeing in terms of data quality. I'm not as familiar with social research. I imagine there's a lot of the same problems as there are in commercial research, where there's almost an epidemic of fraudulent participants, bad actors, and organized fraud from bot farms. So very high percentages of data has to be cleaned out. Now, of course, that's really important that we make sure we try and weed out fraud, and we have real verified people coming into our surveys. However, what's the point in spending, excuse me, what's the point in spending a lot of time, money, and effort on making sure that we get real people into surveys if we then give them a bad experience? An experience that doesn't engage them, that makes them want to rush through the survey, so they don't really think about the topics we're asking them about, and they don't give us considered answers. And the rather poor metaphor that's represented by the images here, just like you need more than real eggs to make a delicious omelette, you need more than real people to provide good quality data. So providing good, engaging experiences is really important. So because we feel the transformational benefit of conversational AI is in doing quant better, we say the future of quant is qual. And the reason for that is with conversational AI methods, we can still measure all of the question types and have all of the capabilities of any quantitative survey, but we can layer in qualitative capabilities on top. So we can explore people's opinions and attitudes at depth through open ends and AI probing, like you saw before. And we can use more enabling qualitative type approaches like projective techniques, but again, in a more scaled way. And all of this will create more engaging experiences for participants. So I'm just going to show you a few quick examples of how this can be done. So to start off with how we can do more typical quant questions in a conversational AI interview exercise. So you'll see from this video, it's a chatbot-led choice questions using emojis, making it very visual. You can use any particular imagery you want to. Scale questions, bring in all sorts of different icons, make it more visual and engaging for the participant. Avoid those horrible grids, which are the worst part of any survey. Put what we want people to focus on front and center, very visual, carousel type of format with the scale underneath. So we can make just the basic quant questions a lot more engaging through a more conversational format, a more intuitive format for people. It's how they spend a lot of their time online. But we can go deeper. One of the things we can do is use digital versions of qualitative projective techniques. Now, the qualities amongst you will probably be familiar with what's often called the blob tree or the tree man projective. And we can use this in a more quantitative sense through conversational surveys as well. This would typically be used maybe if we were looking at a recent experience, maybe the employee experience, maybe a service delivery experience. Rather than just ask people how they felt about that last experience, the moderator would say, well, which of these characters reflects how you felt? And then why did you choose that character? And what are the feelings and emotions that conveys about that experience? And we can do the same in this conversational survey setting. And it just allows people to think more creatively and to better articulate their feelings and emotions. We can actually fully gamify qualitative projective techniques. Here's an example of another common qualitative projective, the hot air balloon exercise. You can see we go into this mini-game format. The idea is you're in a hot air balloon. It won't fly because it's overloaded with too many sandbags. The sandbags represent features and benefits. In this case, it was for mobile phones. And then the participant has to drop them one by one. And then we follow up with the whys, and we use the AI to probe. So it's just a much more engaging and fun way for the participants to think about feature prioritization. Another projective that we can use is the guided fantasy projective. In this case, it was used to get to deeper brand perceptions for the brand Apple. We asked people to, because if we just ask people, what do you think of Apple? We'll probably get the same 2 or 3 answers from everybody. In this exercise, we asked people to imagine they're on a journey, they're in a spaceship, they're on the way to planet Apple. How do they feel on the way there? What are the thoughts and feelings that are going through their mind? And then the animation continues. They've now arrived on planet Apple. What does it look like? What do you see? Tell me about all of your experiences and emotions. And then people are back in their spaceship. They're returning to Earth. Would they like to visit again? Questions can be customizable. Maybe what will you tell people when you get back to Earth? Here it was done for brand perceptions, but really the use of these projectives is as broad as the researcher is imaginative. So, to give another example, this was used recently for a study that was looking at climate change anxiety and fears amongst younger people, and we asked them to imagine they were on a journey to what Earth would be like in 2050. How did they feel on the way there? What did it look like when they got there? And then what would they tell people in 2024 when they got back to Earth? You can also use common deep dive tools that are used in a lot of surveys and looking at different types of stimulus, but you can go deeper with more verbatim data. So what you're saying here is an output of a tool to get people to evaluate video creative. The idea is that people will pause it at certain points that they like, dislike, or find confusing, but then they tell us the why. So you get an output like this where you can see the peaks and troughs of engagement, and you can click into those areas to see, well, why does a particular part work well, or what do you need to do to optimize at certain points. So from a participant perspective, that works something like this. You can see them pausing the video. This person likes it there, and then they tell us why. And we can do the same with more with text concepts such as this one, or with creative, or with concepts that's a mixture of words and images like this. So you get your hotspot analysis, but you get that understanding of why something works well or not, and how you can optimize. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip through the next example pretty quickly, but what you're seeing here is a more fun, engaging way to do an exercise which gives you the same output as a max diff, because it gives you as an output a scale preference ranking, but it goes further to understand the why. So you can see here, in this case it was logos. This person preferred that particular logo. They tell us why. This looks like a place for noodles. And then the AI probes again, and through the probe, we get to much deeper insight. And then we show them one of the ones they don't like, They tell us why, and then again, the AI probes, and through their answer, we start to learn much more. And being able to make these types of approaches more engaging to, if you like, add that qualitative layer to make quant more engaging, not only does it give deeper insight to the researcher, but it matters to participants. When we ask people how they find this type of survey experience versus traditional surveys across countries and cultures, universally, people tell us it's better. Typically, more than half are saying it's a lot better. And when we ask them why, the reasons are clear. People tell us things like, I felt like I was speaking with someone I know. I felt like free to answer the questions. I wasn't hemmed in by predefined options. And actually reporting like this business owner that actually they gave better quality data. Self-reporting, they gave better quality data. They had a better look at the questions and could give better answers. And people often tell us things like they feel like they're being listened to and like their opinion matters. So hopefully that's helped you realize why I believe the transformational potential here really is quant, and doing quant in a much better way that layers in qualitative capabilities. Because in doing so, we can still measure all of the question types and capabilities of any quantitative survey, but get to much greater depth of understanding through things like real-time AI probing and projectives. And it means we have much more engaged participants who pay more attention and reward us with better quality data. So my contact details are there. I'll be around all day. I'd love to chat if anyone's interested to learn more. There's a barcode there if you're interested in finding out more about me and the company as well. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Phil. So you'll be pleased to know, first of all, this audience can multitask, and you've been sending lots of questions in. So you have lots of questions. We don't have time for all of them. So what I thought I'd do is, I've already looked at the ones that are most popular. I'm going to summarize a few of them into one question. We'll have probably time for about two.
Okay.
So the first one that keeps coming up and people are very curious about is, how do participants feel about being interviewed by an AI as opposed to a human? And you've mentioned some of those answers already. But there's some particular things that people brought up, which is, what is it that it's going to do to our disengagement potentially with particular participants groups, or moving a little bit away from the commercial examples you gave. What if we talk about sensitive topics in research? Mm-hmm. Are you worried? And can you think of maybe a use case where you're like, we don't want to use a conversational AI, and we do need a human?
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a really good question. So the first thing to say is, I would always recommend we're fully transparent. The first thing we say is, hi, I'm an AI chatbot for research. You will find a few people don't like that, but in my experience, the vast majority of people, they're kind of used to engaging with chatbots in everyday life. Except here, the chatbot obviously is asking for information. They're not trying to find out information like those really kind of frustrating customer experience chatbots. So genuinely, most people do report it's a better experience, certainly compared to other surveys, as you saw there. The issue of sensitive topics is actually really interesting, and it's an area we'd love to do some more research in. I think certainly compared to traditional surveys, actually we've got some data that shows us actually we can get much deeper insight on sensitive topics. One of our partners did a side-by-side comparison where they were looking asking people about their financial situation, and there were some quite sensitive questions in that in terms of their financial struggles they may face. And they actually graded the open-ended questions in terms of degree of sensitivity. And what they found in the traditional survey, as they went from a medium to a high sensitivity topic, is people said less. And when they went in the chatbot-led survey with good probing, from a medium sensitivity to high sensitivity topic, people told us more. And I think that's because of the relevancy of the probing, and people feel enabled and encouraged to say more. So it's an interesting area. I think there's, in a more qualitative setting, there's obviously some big potential cons, but at the same time, there could be some pros. You don't have the moderator effect. Might people feel more comfortable talking to a machine about something really sensitive than talking to another person? I don't know, but that's something that would be interesting to investigate.
That's right. And one of the questions that came from that was, can you think of demographic groups potentially that could be left out because of a shift from, say, an in-person interview to something that's, feels very human-like but isn't?
Yeah. Not really, to be honest. I mean, most older people now, not all of them. Obviously, we do have to be sensitive to that in terms of who we speak and the methodologies we're using, but most older people are pretty tech literate. They're using their phones a lot for things like WhatsApp conversations, which this format mimics. Another thing that's really interesting, actually, in some of the research that we've seen, at least across North America, where it was done across Canada and across the USA, is that whilst everyone's much more positive about this experience compared to a regular survey, more underrepresented groups in research, so people of different ethnicities, and actually in some research done in the UK, people with disabilities, the delta between what they thought of the regular survey and a chatbot survey was actually bigger for those underrepresented groups than it was for the regular survey. And I don't know why that is, but again, it'd be interesting to explore that further and find out.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have time. I'm going to summarize a few more questions here into one last one, which is, people are very curious about the following, which is, as researchers in a room, we've all started out somewhere at some point, which means we had to learn how to do certain things. Research is, you cut your teeth on something hard, maybe a bit boring at times, like, sitting there, doing a lot of interviews, looking through them. Yeah. So with this, we could be moving in a direction where we need less of the junior researchers. So how do we make sure, first of all, that we still train the next generation, they don't lose those skills? And then looking forward, in particular what you said about how you train these models, you're looking for the best moderators. What if they're not there anymore in the future to train your models?
Okay, good question. I mean, I think that's a much wider issue with AI. I mean, there are some very worrying things about potentially the reduction in more entry-level jobs. I think specifically for research, what AI tools mean is that researchers need to spend less time on the doing and the process and more time thinking about how we set it up so it's going to work most effectively. We still have to do a lot of training and scoping of the survey to make sure it meets our objectives. And then the researchers should be focusing much more on what it all means in terms of the data we get back and how they work with their stakeholders to take them to action. So I think that means we need to be training different people, younger people, in terms of different skills. So actually those advisory skills, those interpersonal skills, those persuading skills are going to become really, really important.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Phil. Applause again for Phil. Thank you very much.